Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's Mike here at Gamefromscratch, and about a month ago, for reasons, a number of developers announced that they were looking at or planning to migrate over to the Godot game engine. And the nice thing is, after a month plus has elapsed, we've actually got some feedback on how that process has gone. So now what we're going to look at is 3 developers and their process of porting over to Godot and the experiences they encountered. The first one we're starting with is what you see in front of you. This is Dancing Duelists. This was made by MegaCrit, the creators of Slay the Spire. This is a game jam game, proof of concept card auto battler, just to prove that Godot could do what they need it to do. So this is written entirely in Godot, and you got a number of different characters to choose from. Let's pick Hardcore Henry here, and select it, and yeah, let's go in. So you got the UI. It's again a card battler type game. Let's pick 2 cards to go with, and we'll go ahead and fight. This thing isn't actually that important to the overall thing, but you get an idea. This was created in Godot. It did prove to them that Godot is capable of the kind of experiences they were expecting, and then on top of that, they have now experienced with Godot and what it went to go about creating this. The cool thing here is you can download this and check it out if you wish. So this was released up on Git.io from MegaCrit. So this is the project we just looked at right there. So this was developed in, I think, about a week, and it was part of the Jump Ship Mega Jam. But this was their proof of concept to evaluate Godot, and now they've also done a blog post to break down what their experiences were working with Godot. So they start off with a bit of an explanation of why they left Unity. I'm not going to go through that subject again. I think you all know at this point in time, but MegaCrit came out fairly vocally about this pretty early on. And then they started evaluating Godot. Now, one of the interesting things is they broke down why they looked at Godot. First off, it is more than just a game library. They don't want something super low level like SDL or LWJGL, which, by the way, is like a Java version of SDL. So they want things for loading resources, font stuff, handling things. Basically, they want to have the low level stuff taken care of. Although you'll find in this document that they're not really GUI IDE heavy people. They roll a lot of systems themselves. They also wanted statically typed languages. Basically, in his opinion, JavaScript and Python are icky. Again, that's his wording, not mine. So he wanted to work in a statically typed language, which, by the way, C# does conform to that. And then the other big part is there is a community. So Godot feels like a popular alternative in terms of enthusiasm. He can solve problems, but he's also kind of lazy and will just hack things together. He would ideally have a community out there that will help support him. So that is part of why he picked up Godot as well. And then porting. So he wants to be able to port to a variety of different platforms. One of the things about it is there are games out there like Brotato and Cassette Beast that are already on platforms. So that and the combination of W4 Games, which is a porting company developed by the Godot founders, gave him confidence that Godot will be supported on a variety of different platforms. So those were the big reasons why he picked it. And then the other one that I found interesting is the intangibles. Things like general engine speed, how regularly it's updated, how pleasant the interface is, and whether or not the owners/founders are displaying signs of John Riccitellitis. I think that should be a new word here. Sorry, CEO greed from now forth should be called John Riccitellitis. So that is where they're at. They built this thing as a proof of concept. Again, you can go ahead and download it if you wish. They looked at the content and asset pipeline here, a couple of things that they run in. So they're very code focused. They actually store their card as code, as an example here. So the one thing that they found is Godot uses, by the way, I'm skimming over a lot of things, so this isn't a 10-hour video, but they like the fact that Godot stores everything as scenes, and inside of scenes as TSCN format, which works fine with Git, as opposed to the YAML stuff, which does not work well with Perforce, so they don't like Perforce as it comes down to it. So you can have an easier merge job of working with things going forward. UI, basically their process of the UI systems in games, they're not a big fan of either of them. The out-of-the-box gives you an out-of-the-box looking UI. The summary was, in both Godot and Unity, all special nodes for UI are bad. That's right, they have been always bad, they will always remain bad. Games have a lot of complex UI cases, and borrowing generic templates will make your game shit. It's short for user interface. It's how your users interact with the game. So they're not a big fan of UI kits, though what they do like from Unity was Text Mesh Pro, which is a wonderful plugin, by the way. It gives you a lot of control over how fonts and text are laid out. In the world of Godot, there are sign distance field-based fonts, MSDFs. It's cool technology, Corners are so sharp and they scale really well, except when they don't work whatsoever. So yeah, there is a bit of an issue with them, but they did file an issue report, by the way. In terms of C#, there were a lot of GD script evangelists that told them that C# was absolute crap, unstable, and would not work. So they had their own experiences worth working with it, and they were pleasantly surprised by the C# integration. Set up to use IDE of choice, which was JetBrains Rider, was easy, autocomplete works, game could be run from the IDE by default, switching to Godot and running the game was fast. I mean, really fast. The 5 to 10 second compiling scripts pop-up in Unity always haunts my dreams. And then about Godot in general, is it fast? On the topic of speed, opening a project is faster, doesn't require some bullshit authentication. Running a project is faster, the scripting workflow is faster, and exporting builds are faster. It's fast. So they're definitely happy with the performance. There is one thing that you should be aware of, though, is Raycast 2D performance. A lot of people talking about this on the internets, and they recommend that you check that out. Now, a pain point they did have was working with texture packing. It kind of sucks. All that there is to it, at least it can read files created using Texture Packer. It's a third-party tool, by the way. It's just a tad annoying. Then again, Unity would pack them every time I ran the game, which was stupid too. Maybe this workflow has never been great for anyone anywhere. So texture packing was a pain point that they had with their things. This is specifically about problems with their game and the game design, not actually about the Godot game engine. And yeah, so that is kind of their summary. So just 3 weeks, they got a real video game. You can download and play right there. That was the link available for it. I'll have this down below as well. There are, again, some caveats. So C# does have some issues compiling on certain platforms, but this iOS and Android were just solved in experimental form with Godot 4.1 that just shipped in beta. There are more topics to cover, like input SDK integration, aspect ratio work, localization, hardware compatibility, third-party plugins such as Spine2D and Fmod, modability, but making good video games are a marathon, not a sprint. All right, I'm going to call it for this write-up. I'm by no means a Godot expert, but the tools to make a real 2D video game seem to be there. So that is MegaCrit's conclusion after doing a 3-week game jam, proof of concept for their own stuff. Godot works. There's some things that don't work great, but for the most part, they seem pretty happy with it. Now, an interesting developer out there also, I covered this earlier on in one of the Unity Fallout videos. Road to Vostok is actually being ported over to Godot, and the author of it has done just a wonderful job of documenting the process. So this is like a survival FPS. It kind of feels a bit like Stalker to me, but he's been documenting as he ports it over to the Unity game engine, to the Godot game engine, and his progress has been very impressive. So he's done 2 progress updates. On October the 8th, he did one, and they figure about 10% ported in 110 hours using Godot. Got 24 of their scripts transferred over, 16 3D assets transferred, 32 audio files, and their Godot project is now up to 5.62 gigabytes in size. They get a big breakdown of why they picked Godot. So the long-term brand damage for Unity is scary. It's creates uncertainty and multiple negative side effects that I don't want to deal with. I want to focus on game development, have fun while doing that. I'm not going to worry about some company's decision-making, future financial situation, etc. Here, let me just zoom this in a little bit more. And then when it comes to the development cycle, the project was still in a reasonable port window, which means porting the game to another engine was still possible and a strategic option without major setbacks. And he really likes Godot. I like the open source nature, potential ecosystem, and simple yet effective engine editor that works for this game idea. Godot is not a Unity replacement, and it should not be. It's a different engine with different workflows, and those fit nicely for this project and my preferred ways of developing things. So again, 100 plus hours in Godot development and the kind of experiences that he's had going through it. This was more of a kind of a long-form document. I'm going to go into a ton of detail with what he says. But for the most part, he likes the design of the Godot editor, the minimalism, and the way things works. It doesn't need to challenge Unreal or Unity when it comes to advanced features and tech innovations. I would any day take a solid engine with a polished core over an aging engine that offers everything, and most of the stuff is experimental or constantly changing. That sounds familiar. Topic has always been one of the main problems with Unity in recent years. Unity has introduced different rendering pipelines, numerous new technologies, and spent huge amounts of resources on providing highly experimental, non-production ready features. This mindset most likely comes from trying to compete with Unreal and trying to remain relevant state-of-the-art game engine and show investors some rapid growth tech potential. While competition is good in every industry, everything doesn't need to be state-of-the-art. Most developers just want useful tools, good resources to learn from, and platforms that support their creativity. I think Godot does a good job providing those based on my first impressions. So there are some pain points that he's run into. He's had a handful of crashes, 3 to 4 crashes, but it does a good job with the auto restore, so getting back from it hasn't been a big issue. They're not deal breakers. Faced these when I did the initial testing phase with Godot. So let's just say there are certain things you just don't do. For example, drag around a 4K HDR skybox around the editor rapidly. There's plenty of stuff for me to learn, minor routine issues that are not related to developer skill or engine knowledge. One practical example of these is renaming, moving, or importing stuff is pretty slow, and there's some processes that are happening with the importer which take an unnormal amount of time. I do think some of this has changed with 4.1. Definitely one thing I like with the 4.1 change is that you can now change the import and it doesn't cause the damned editor to restart. That's a big move forward in my humble opinion. Now, they do think that the Godot team should create a smallish, mid-sized game project in order to feel the daily routines and time sinks that a real developer does. And I think Godot should. Unity started doing this with Gagaia, and they killed it off. I do agree with him that dogfooding your own product will give you the experiences that game developers run into. So the big question is, can you do realistic 3D in Godot? The short answer is yes. So it handles large worlds, chunk loading, and high polygon count environments. Probably require deep level of knowledge about optimizing genre-specific 3D rendering from the developer and making custom tools to support it. Godot is not Unreal or Unity when it comes to 3D rendering, but it has all the core elements and performance to draw semi-detailed environments like in Road to Vostok. My way of making games, game art is based on low, medium poly counts, simple photo textures without PBR workflows, and a fairly compact individual levels. So the project is not the ultimate 3D stress test for Godot. In terms of visual, let's go through the core elements that need to be in place or happen in order to support 3D rendering. So XYZ coordinates, drawing a bunch of vertex points, using shaders that tell the color of individual pixels on screen, support for light, shadows, reflections, and additional effects, camera that can render these elements within its 3D view frustum, audio sources, positional, directional audio for 3D scenes, general physics calculation to support collisions and gravity, optimizations for doing render and physics loops as fast as possible. That's basically found in every 3D game engine, to be honest. So Godot does have all of these things. And then external realistic 3D assets, realistic textures, and so on. Those are more art decisions than anything. So realistic 3D is mostly based on external assets, not on the engine itself. So Godot does what he needs with his art style he's finding. There's definitely room for improvement with 3D in Godot, but in its current state, it does not block his attempt or creativity for making a realistic 3D variety, environments for Road to Vostoks. There's still a bunch unknown to him, so one of those things to definitely be aware of. But the other key thing is if he finds something that doesn't exist, he's not really that worried about actually rolling it himself when it comes down to it. So there are some issues that he misses from Unity. Improved temporal anti-aliasing. And then the current TAA is unusable for this project. It blurs all the animations, but eventually it's the only efficient way to implement anti-aliasing for alpha cut nature elements like grass and trees. So that is definitely one issue in Godot that he has run into. Improved ambient occlusion solutions, the subsurface ambient occlusion, or HBAO, with better visual stability, overall performance, and stacking options. So ambient occlusion, so Godot supports only one, and that's the SSAO approach. And for nearby objects like weapons, you really have to crank it to absolute max to make it decent visually stable, really expensive, and you don't have anything left for the environment. So there was an option in Unity for separate. That is not available in Godot, so that is definitely a pain point he has. But overall, he is happy with Godot. It fits his needs. So it's going to cost him a few months of extra development time. He thinks it still is the right choice to keep going forward. So what's the current porting phase? Procedural, rebuild the procedural content, control a weapon system, and other core features in Godot. Tried to port these features with a mentality to improve and learn some of the mistakes he did back in Unity. For the past week, he's been basically setting up core elements in a way that are easy to debug, control, and so on. Pretty much done with the foundation now and moving on from that. So then we move into his second developer update. At this point in time, he is at 15% instead of, I believe it was 10? Yeah, so he's now at 15%. His project has grown by about a gigabyte in size. More assets have been transferred over, etc. So smooth sailing so far. So when you make a risky, life-changing risky decision like changing a game engine, you calculate the worst case scenario and try to prepare for difficult tasks that might come as a surprise for you. When porting, so far there have been only minor pain points, and the porting process has actually been quite enjoyable for me. There are still many scary porting topics left, like the inventory system and AI, but so far everything that I ported has moved quite nicely to the new engine, even with a different scripting language. So in terms of the things that he has ported in the last 2 weeks, procedural FPS controller, weapon handling, camera interpolation, inertia system, recoil system, the custom sound solution, custom billboard solution, key maps, key binding, a settings menu, main menu, bullet decals, and cartridges, time of day, skybox ambience, flashlight, 3 animated weapons, 3 optics with RDS holographic shaders, 26 3D objects with textures and materials, custom lit and terrain shader, footstep system, and various debug and test scenes. So we got other things to come in, including some AI works, character stats, interaction system, and the looting system. One area that he has run into, and he's not necessarily calling this a bad thing, but it is a pain thing. FBX is sort of an industry standard, and Godot kind of doesn't use that industry standard. Godot is built more around GLTF, and they found some glitches or implementation details where things were done slightly different in GLTF. So you can see a shading issue with GLTF versus the FBX import. These things are causing some actual pain for him in the process. He kind of goes through exactly what happened with these doubled up hidden vertices and so on. But again, it's not, he doesn't consider them bugs, they're format behaviors. And you know what? Pipelines are always a bit of a pain in the butt. So that's not really surprising right there. He also talks a little bit about benchmarking. And this kind of goes back in some ways to what he said in the earlier blog post. If Godot set up a game design team to stress test their engine, then you would have this kind of things. But he's basically building up a stress test to make sure that Godot can do the kind of things that he needs it to do. So there are a lack of FPS for like first-person shooter samples out there. So he decided to make one of these scenes himself. Multiple debug benchmark stress test scenes that are specially designed around FPS genres. They have talked about actually making them available for the Godot team if they want to do the stress testing as well. But there, so yeah, here's where he says that make them available with the team. So there should be better benchmarking. I do agree there, just to prove, and this is one of those problems that Godot has in general, is there's a proof of, well, here, he sums it up perfectly here. There's a weird stigma for Godot. I don't know where they've acquired this reputation, but there might be something that I don't know about this engine's history or previous versions that the current version can definitely handle 3D and FPS projects without major problems. And this is what you get when you can't show a high performance thing. And one of the things we've got the third-person demo, the third-person example, and it actually doesn't have a lot of the optimization tricks and such that were added into Godot 4, so it runs very slow compared to what it could run. So selling, it'd be much easier to sell the engine potential through something visual where you can just play and see how it could behave for your game idea. I agree 100% that you do need better benchmarks on Godot or more shipped games that prove that it can actually pull this stuff off. Now, what he also probably, I think he's jumping in at Godot 4, and let's just be frank, the performance of 3D in Godot has come a long way, and I doubt you could have done a real viable performance first-person shooter with Godot 3. I just don't think the performance was there. So part of that reputation is probably earned, but I do see how there is value in having more benchmarks or a new updated sample that people can see and go, okay, this is what Godot is capable of. So I do agree with him on that one. And that is the end of his dev blog. He's got another one coming near the end of this month. When I find what he talks about and the way he talks about it fascinating. And by the way, if you are interested in learning more, he did a video very early on about his experiences with Godot and porting things over. And it's a fun watch. I would recommend it. I will, of course, have this link down below as well. So that is the Road to Vostok development team. And then there's one last one I kind of mentioned on, and this one is Rapid. So this is the Caves of Quud. Caves of Quud. I don't actually know how this is said. Caves of Quud. Director Brian Bucklew. He talked about how he ported over. He was pretty pissed off at Unity 2, and he ported his game. So he basically live tweet session and what he ran into. Again, I will link this thread if you want to check it out itself. So this was done on September the 16th. By the way, the Fallout was on September the 12th. So this was pretty early on. He installed Godot, starts playing around with Godot, looks at Godot, brings over, starts importing all of his assets, has some issues with some old assets, brings all of the assets over. They are now in the engine. Then he starts going over to his code. So he brings in creates a C# solution, ports the entirety of his C# code over to Godot. He gets 5,641 errors. Then he just starts basically drilling down into the code. He makes a couple of shims, so a glued library for the stuff that was required that is causing the breakage, and then he keeps going and basically slowly starts porting things over. The JSON library is down to 4,700 errors at this point in time. He keeps going with his porting code. He's down to 944 errors at this point in time, so we're still on September the 16th, by the way. Then keeps going in the porting process. Again, if you want to learn more about what he experienced, he did live tweet it as he went, and then apparently went and picked some strawberries. And then down we go some more. So still there, porting over a couple more encounters. He's down to 380 errors at this point, and it continues. So we're still on day 1. We're now into day 2, still doing some more code porting. 93 errors at this point in time. On and on and on it goes. And then eventually he gets to this stage right here, and game, set, match, nothing but net. His game is running 2 days. And it was like a massive amount of source code. I think it was 500,000 lines of code, C# code that he started with. And yeah, so the live tweet process of moving Caves of Quud was completely documented here on moving all of this code over. So if you want to learn more about it and the process that he went through, the entire thing is documented there. I don't think that this is a normal experience, by the way. You would generally expect a lot more pain, and there's still a lot more work for him to do, hook the graphics up to the underlying game, but the simulation system is now running on the back end. His code compiles, etc., and he did it more or less in 2 days, which is pretty impressive. So if you're interested in reading that thread, it talks about all of the things that he encountered as part of the porting process. And then there is one last piece of news to cover, and this one kind of sucks. There was this announcement about the Unifree. This was actually a pretty cool concept. It's basically a porting tool that was going to be used to so that you could move from Unity to other game engines. It's dead. So this was 100% just a marketing exercise. And yeah, there's no more to it. This is a dead project. There has not been an update in over 3 weeks now. So Unifree, I think we can report as pretty much not going to happen. So it seems like this was just an exercise to cash in on the marketing blitz at the time of the Unity exodus, and Unifree does not look like the kind of tool that you can use to port away from Unity, which is unfortunate. But some of the things that it actually built on, like the Unidot exporter, etc., those all do work and are worth checking out. So yeah, it's pretty interesting rundown. These are 3 developers that moved away from Godot, or moving away from Unity to Godot, and their experiences. The first one we have MegaCrit. They created this game that you can go ahead and download, and they documented their process of creating it. Next up, we have the incredibly interesting Road to Vostok ongoing saga. It's a very, very, very good read, and it's just super interesting to watch. So I would highly recommend checking that one out. And then finally, we've got Caves of Quud director here, and his experience of porting all of his source code over in an impressive 2 to 3 days. It's just mind-blowing that he pulled that one off. So that is the experience that some people are having moving to Godot. There are some pain points, but they haven't seemed that bad. Did you move over to Godot? Are you still doing so? Did you experience some pain points? What were they? Or did you start to move and just completely give up? Or did those last-minute changes and the firing of John Ricciotelo go, nah, I'm good with Unity? Let me know. Comments down below, and I'll talk to you all later. Goodbye.